And another one, thank you. And another one, thank you. And another one, thank you. I'm talking about another great conversation. I just sat down with Dr. Trisha Wolfe. Great conversation. She is a trauma therapist, educator, and researcher who specializes in complex and developmental trauma with a focus on high achieving perfectionists, people pleasers, and chronic overthinkers who say, I understand my patterns and why I do them, but I still can't seem to change them. I know a lot of us can relate to that. Her work with high achieving perfectionists, people pleasers, and chronic overthinkers really blends neuroscience with somatic practice and awareness, which I love. I came across her incredibly helpful content on TikTok, and this conversation honestly only solidified for me that she really is a wealth of knowledge and insights to really support us in healing from traumatic experiences and jolting ruptures and shifts and helping to adjust our paths and helping us to unlearn our conditioning and then relearn patterns, beliefs, habits that can actually serve us really well, right, in our life. I love that there was this beautiful blend of science and spirituality in this conversation that I was really digging, and I really hope you do too. Just such a lovely person. And I'm so eager for y'all to hear this conversation with Dr. Trisha Wolfe. Connected in the Den, a cozy, no bullshit space where we talk energy, intuition, healing, and real life spiritual stuff without the freaking fluff. Think soul convos, ancestral wisdom, alien magic, and the occasional cosmic rant, all from the comfort of your inner cave. I hope you feel connected in the den. Okay, Dr. Trisha. I'm going to call you Dr. Trisha. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
Okay. How are we doing today?
Doing pretty well. So excited to be here.
Good. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sitting with me and letting me kind of pick your brain a little bit. I love your content. Your posts have been just very validating. I feel like, from my own experience and a lot of things that I touch on too, in terms of just helping people understand too in a spirituality perspective. As a spiritual coach, teaching people intuition and different healing modalities, holistic healing practices, psychic mediumship abilities and stuff. And a lot of it kind of branches off into a lot of what you talk about and what you teach. So as a therapist, an educator in trauma, I know your work really does focus on high achieving perfectionists, people pleasers, and chronic overthinkers. Mm-hmm. I love that your work really does blend neuroscience and somatic practices and awareness. So can you please explain what that would look like, the blending of the somatic practices with the neuroscience understanding?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been such an interesting time because I started training in somatics about 10 years ago, and it was still a little bit of a fringe practice. Like the regular therapists I knew were kind of like, oh, that's kind of woo-woo,
Yeah.
But as it's come more into modern culture, it's become another tool that's kind of foisted upon us as like, you just need to do somatic work. You just need to regulate your body, especially toward neurodivergent people or people who spend more time up in their heads. They're often told, you just need to feel your feelings, regulate your nervous system, and be in your body. Of course, that's a vast misunderstanding of how the science works. And I so understand that we all want something that just makes us feel better, which is often why people are like hoping I can do some somatic work and finally feel better. But it's not possible to address the body without also addressing the mind because they send information bidirectionally, meaning they both send and receive to each other. And so I just feel so strongly about helping people understand what these engines of change are that involve both the mind and the body. So we want to both work with our unconscious mind that holds all of these roadways that we've traveled down in our lives, some which are good and some which might be roadways we no longer want to travel down.
Yeah.
And we also want to look at how our body responds when we travel down those roadways or how our body might send us signals that unintentionally get us down roadways we don't want to go down. What I mean by that is sometimes we can perceive something is dangerous that isn't actually dangerous, and it can send us down a pathway of shutting down, going up into our heads, getting confused of what we really want to do. And we
Mm-hmm.
believe it because our body is saying tight, tight, tension, anxious, fast heart.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's vice versa, where our brain can be giving us the signal, but our body is actually telling us that it's safe and okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not possible to create change and to truly connect with ourselves without addressing both the mind and the body. And we do that through what's called our interoceptive system, which is just the system that lets us track the sensations in our body. Now, some people have a very turned down interoceptive system because it works like a volume knob. So some people's turned up really loud. They feel every single sensation in their body. That's also not that pleasant because you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to feel every sensation, right?
Yeah, it can be overwhelming.
Very
Yeah,
overwhelming, right? Like
yeah.
you don't want to feel your heartbeat all of the time. But some of us too might have very turned down volume knob for our sensations.
Mm-hmm.
And we might think it's not possible for us to ever get clues from our body, which can be very frustrating because we rely on that information. But I think the good news is when you understand the way the brain and body work together, somatic work doesn't have to be so challenging, scary, or opaque.
Mm-hmm.
Even people who say, well, I don't really feel sensations in my body, it's just how I am as a person. I totally understand. You might be a thinking forward person, but have you ever felt your shoulders tense?
Mm.
Have you ever felt butterflies in your stomach? This is kind of silly, but when I get anxious, kind of scrunch up my toes. So,
Okay.
it's not like
Yeah.
this big leap, like, and then I felt this glittering. Maybe you do, which is great,
Right,
right?
right.
But you kind of want to demystify that, like, just these little clues our body gives us that if we're not sure about something, but suddenly our shoulders feel really tight, that's information to take in.
Right, 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 right. Okay. So, okay, first let's maybe break down some of the I don't even know if I would call them terms. Are they terms like intellectualizers, chronic overthinkers, people pleasers? Like, can we break those down just a little bit?
Let's totally do that. I think humans love assigning terms to things because it just helps them make meaning out of an experience,
Yes,
right? So
yes.
those terms are really names given to bundles of thoughts, emotions, body sensations, and behaviors.
Okay.
And what I'll say about all three of those before we dive in is they're all adaptive, meaning they're all in response to something. They are not personality traits and they are not deficits,
Yeah.
but rather they are adaptive responses to things we've experienced in our lives, in our
Mm-hmm.
early environments, in our current world, even in our bodies if we have chronic pain and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to know there's nothing wrong with you if you identify with any of these labels. But when we think about some of these things, we think about a people pleaser, quote unquote, as a person who has a real difficult time connecting with their own needs. And they're often super aware of everybody else's needs, like
Mm-hmm.
hyper vigilantly so. So if they're in a room of 10 people, they will sense the moment someone else gets upset.
Mm-hmm.
They have this idea of what everyone else in the room is doing, how they're feeling, and what they need. And it's hypervigilant because there's an anxiety behind it of this need for other people to feel okay so that we can feel okay. And because we have limited energy, it also means we have a difficult time taking care of our own needs. We might not even feel safe having
Mm-hmm.
needs, right? It might feel like if I take care of my own needs, someone will get mad at me or that will take from someone else. All of these can be experienced in a lot of different ways. And the level of, again, the volume on it, right, can be turned up really loud, or it can be in certain situations. Like maybe you have no problem having needs and setting boundaries at work, but with your partner, where there's this risk of potential loss of a relationship,
Right.
suddenly agree to whatever they want, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very
So it can
nuanced. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? It can show up differently in different situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so perfectionism is very similar in the sense that there's this need to have everything be just so, be right, do it perfectly. And oftentimes there's an achieving slant with perfectionism too, where they need to be moving to the next milestone. There's a lot of gripping and bracing in all three of these,
Mm-hmm.
but perfectionists often, they may not realize it, have a very braced body because
Okay.
they're managing everything all of the time so tightly. We might hear the
Mm-hmm.
term control freak, quote
Right.
unquote.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like when
Right?
people say like, oh, she's or she or he or whatever is really tightly wound or, like,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And why? Because again, there's a component to this of I need to do this to be worthy, to be valuable, to be acceptable, to be loved. It's very typical that that will not be a conscious thought. And a
Mm-hmm.
person will say rationally, I know that's not true, even if I'm not perfect. So and so will love me or I'll still be okay. These are all unconscious experiences
Right.
that manifest as these patterns of
Mm-hmm.
behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one, intellectualization, overthinkers, one of my personal favorites, and I feel a lot of affinity with them as a fellow intellectualizer,
Yep.
is a person who learned that being fully present, feeling feelings, and even being in the body was not a good and safe experience. It
Mm-hmm.
was overwhelming, it was too much. It may also have been a sense of not enoughness, like there was a withdrawal or neglect experience. And
Mm-hmm.
so when those things happen, especially when we're children, but it can happen as adults too, there's this sense of everything is too much or not enough, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. So there's
Right.
this loss of agency of any capacity to feel these things, especially when we don't have a community or a connected person to be with us in our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go up into our head and we learn to analyze, to plan, to think. We love planners, notebooks, self-help books, spreadsheets. We love
Yes.
journaling. We love
Yes.
all of those things because it gives us this sense that if I can just know enough and see
Mm-hmm.
everything that's going to come, then I'll be okay.
Right.
And each of the three of these actually have a similar problem, which is that they can be very missed in traditional therapy and self-help models because there are people who aren't aware they possess these strategies. But the vast majority of time, especially people who have had trauma or are neurodivergent in some way, they know.
Mm-hmm.
They observe themselves. They see these things, but they can't get unstuck from it. And that's because these are not purely behavioral strategies where you can say, now go set a boundary this way. They're held in our unconscious
Yeah.
experience, and they're all based around survival and connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so like I feel like I'm gonna have to like listen back to this because I feel like there's a lot of knowledge here that I think is really helpful. And the thing is, I feel like I started to mm, reconnect with myself or like unlearn a lot of things during COVID when we were forced into lockdown and we were forced to kind of slow down and I wasn't really working. So I had all this time on my hands. So of course, as an intellectualizer, like it's like, okay, let me figure out what's coming to the surface here, right? And so I do you find that there is more of like a I like to call them awakenings, right? When our reality is shifting, what we know is shifting, and we start to get in touch with ourselves, or we have more access to tools like with what you're sharing online, and people start to be like, oh, wait a minute, like that kind of sounds like me. Or so how like do you feel like there's like a process for people to start to uncover these things? Do you see a shift that's sort of happening with people?
It's such a good question, and I do think that major happenings like that
Yeah.
can be a portal into shifting your life experience. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we're plopped right into it without
Yeah.
our own choosing. I came to this work after going through a traumatic loss. I worked in finance. Like I started my career in finance, if you can
Okay.
believe that.
I was
Yeah,
actually going to ask you how, because I'm always curious how people get into, like, I feel like there's a calling, right? That kind of like
there
pulls us
is.
into, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Worked in finance. I worked for a major multinational bank, and I went through a traumatic loss, and it suddenly all was revealed to me that I was so frozen and stuck and in perfectionism and never resting and anxious.
Hmm.
And I was like, I can't do this anymore, and
Yeah.
also to honor the experience that I went through of this major shift in my life, I said, I want to put my energy more towards something that helps other people. To
Hmm.
do so, I need
Hmm.
to do my own work,
Right. So,
And
yeah.
so I think sometimes we are just like handed these doorways, and sometimes the doorways are very painful, but
Hmm.
where it becomes very clear to us the patterns we've been experiencing. Over my career, I've noticed as social media grows and grows and grows, and Substack and all of these other things, people find it sooner than they may have in the past, where as these big portals kind of shifting us through because
Totally.
there's so much information in our face, for better and for worse.
Right. Right.
For
Right.
better, because people are finding out things that make them feel more seen and less alone.
Mm-hmm.
For worse, sometimes because there's a lot of conflicting information out there, and it's very easy to take that, use it against yourself, and go down into shame.
Right.
So I find that so many people who resonate with my content are people who have tried many types of therapy. They've been in the self-help world consuming content, but they can't seem to make a change. So
Mm.
they have this awareness of the patterns. They can't quite get to the other side. And
Mm-hmm.
the information is shifting online. I see it shifting into this new way of understanding that you don't just regulate the nervous system, you don't just work with the thoughts, you actually have to support your brain and body in having new experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's opening things up for people too to start to understand like this is not an intellectual pursuit to heal. Okay?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not something we can, unfortunately, make a checklist for and say, now I've done these things and I never have to feel this way again. I view all of life as a series of expansions and contractions, right? The
Mm-hmm.
waves come in and they go out, the seasons pass, the moon waxes and wanes. And our process will be that way too, but sort of like in an upward, bigger expansions and smaller contractions, but
Mm-hmm.
only if we can be in the process, right? Like when we're in this intellectualized, perfectionistic state. And I think self-help content feeds into this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We're stuck in this like, here's a new thing. I'm going to try to be better, to be more worthy, to be more valuable, to feel my feelings, to be in my body. I tried this thing. I did it for a few days. I stopped doing that thing. I can't get back to it. It must be because I suck and I'll never feel better. And then we kind of
Kind of
repeat the
loop and
cycle.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? So I kind of like saw my original TikTok, which, was about 2 years ago, that had all these millions of views as kind of that moment for some people where they were
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh, there isn't anything wrong with me. I just didn't know the way to really approach this to make long-lasting change.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, what does trauma look like? I guess in someone who is maybe high achieving or like overperforming, like like what might that look like in someone? And how might we be maybe ignoring, some of those cues that how they might be showing up for us?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a sensitive one because so often people who identify as intellectualizers, high functioning achievers, they have a sense that they didn't have trauma.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and people will often come in and say, no, I had a wonderful childhood. They'll list all these things off to me, thinking that I'm going to come in and say, it was your parents.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, like, none of us make it out of childhood unscathed.
Right.
And we every day walk around experiencing challenging experiences right now, especially, right?
100%. Yep.
Every day.
Mhm.
And so in early life, let's just say, for example, you grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of financial resources. We don't have a lot of support in the US for people who don't have financial resources. And so your parents were always very financially stressed.
Mhm.
They're working a lot, but they love you so much and they
Mhm.
want you to do better than them. They put you on the soccer teams, they got you in the mathletes, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you're a kid who loves learning. So you're like, cool, I dig it. But you pick up on these experiences of, wow, there's a lot of tension in my house.
Mhm.
And even though my parents are here and they love me, I can feel the way that things don't feel fully okay.
Yeah.
But what I notice is unconsciously, when I get a really good grade or I win a soccer match or whatever it is, there's a lift.
Mhm.
There's this moment where my parents feel hopeful. They
Mhm.
feel like I'm going to make it out. They are love me. They're excited for me. They want me to have this wonderful life. But what I learned from that is not because my parents don't love me, but is wow, I make things easier on people around me when I do things really well. When I'm successful, when I keep going, when I push harder, when I try harder, things are just a little bit lighter. Now, is anyone going to say your parents traumatized you? Of course not,
Mhm.
right? But what
Mhm.
we're going to say is there's a set of circumstances here where you acquire learnings unconsciously, sometimes consciously too, that build neural pathways in your brain that are full of context. Because neural pathways aren't just data, they're context too, where they say, here's how it felt, here's what it looked like, here's how other people responded. So you don't just turn 18 and say, Well, check that off the list. Now these are firmly embedded in your brain. And any moment you might think of letting off the gas, slowing down a little bit. Gosh, maybe you don't want to study finance after all. Maybe you want to study art. Your brain and body go, oh my gosh, do they know they're going down a really dangerous pathway where they're going to let everyone down around them and lose everything?
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
your brain and body will start setting off all these signals, right? And you might not even realize it. You might just feel super anxious, or you might suddenly think, no, I better add another class. I think maybe next semester I'll let off the gas a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And these patterns just continue. So yes, there very much are people who have these patterns who experienced very severe trauma, but there's also a whole swath of people who didn't experience things that they might consider as trauma,
Right.
but now have these patterns. Also, being neurodivergent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the time I grew up, that wasn't a
It
thing.
wasn't a thing. Yeah.
No, no.
Yeah.
And so, nobody in school, and I was a very intelligent person, but also struggled in deficits in a lot of ways. But because I was intelligent, no one was helping me,
Mm-hmm.
right? But also, I'm sitting here as a child thinking, this work is so boring and easy. I'm reading like 12th grade level, but I also don't know how to relate to other people because
Right.
they're spelling rug and I'm reading this like math book from,
Mm-hmm.
12th grade. So
Mm-hmm.
even that experience is this experience of being othered, unsure, not knowing what's happening. And no one ever said to me, there's something wrong with you, right?
Right. Right.
I had a perfectly fine school experience. I went to great schools,
Mm-hmm.
but there was that sense of otherness, and the brain finds that very dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
right? So often neurodivergent people, naturally their brain works differently, but these protective strategies, because they have felt othered in systems that they've been in, clamp down even more, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I literally feel like you're speaking to my soul. Like I have a bit of column A and column B, like actual like physical traumatic experiences, witnessed traumatic experiences. Just I mean existing in a black body is traumatic in
Sure.
itself, right? But then the things
Yeah.
that you're naming too, like I was on every sports team, on every, and you nailed it, like with like recognizing that kind of shift or that raise when someone does well, a child does well in the household. So how might then, because I feel like there's this whole generation, the millennials, right, that are sort
Mhm.
of shifting some of these patterns from what
Yeah.
we've gone through. So how then can we support children moving forward so that we're not pushing those kind of conditions onto them?
It's a wonderful question. And the difficult answer is that, again, like no one makes it out of childhood unscathed.
Yeah.
So no matter, we don't want to over try, right? Or over pressure ourselves, thinking like, is this going to give this experience to my child? Is this, but to
Mm-hmm.
know like, what's the number one thing we can offer? Being present
Mm-hmm.
and observing our own experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? So always with curiosity and presence is the way we can practice observing some of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're responding to your child in a certain way and you notice that, right? Where you're saying like, wow, you got all A's. And it's like, okay, maybe we could explore that a little bit, right? There's nothing wrong with celebrating getting A's, but maybe we just want to make it like a regular old, like, oh, wow, how did those classes feel for you? Like, which was your favorite?
Yeah.
Yeah, did it feel easy to grab those grades, or was there one that felt a little bit harder? So there's more curiosity, and then
Mm.
noticing within yourself, right? Like, is there a moment where you're like, thank God they got all A's because like I really want them to get into this
Right.
college so that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
being with your own experience of like what might you be landing onto them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Some things to think about because I don't have kids, but I'm an auntie. So I'm always trying to be mindful of my language without trying
Yeah,
to shift how someone else is parenting. Do you know what I mean? But
yeah.
as someone who's, aware of these, I try to be mindful of my language. So that's I think really helpful. What do you think some of the biggest misconceptions about trauma are with, I guess, high achievers?
That's a great question. I mean, I think again, one of the biggest misconceptions is that it's not trauma if it wasn't a big event, or
Yeah.
if your family wasn't, harming you, like hurting you in some way, it's sometimes very hard for people to reconcile that, especially
Mm-hmm.
high achieving intellectualizers, because they're so analytical,
Yeah.
and they'll
Yeah.
say, but I have this and I have this and my parents did that and da da da. And it's like, right, yeah, all of those things are true.
Mm-hmm.
Can it also be true that you had some of these other experiences that were hard? And a big reason for that is our brain does not want to let us accept that because it would
Mm-hmm.
mean something
Yeah.
about us or mean something about our family or mean something about our identity. And the other thing I think is too that people get very hung up on, there's the whole camp of like people are calling everything trauma these days. And people on
Yeah.
the other side of it are saying
Yes.
it wasn't trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to sort of like demythicize the word trauma as this like thing that we have to put so much weight into and just use it as a meaning that like something happened that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always in the eye of the beholder. That's the most important thing about trauma. It's always in the eye of the beholder. So the way a person experiences and perceives an event, if it was traumatic through their perception, then it was trauma. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean anything about you. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean anything about the world. And I think people who have
Mm-hmm.
this, like, we're calling everything trauma these days, there's a little bit of a protection in that stance because what would it mean about them if some of these things were traumatic,
Yeah.
right? And I actually have backed off using the word trauma a little bit because people are so reactive to it. And I
Mm.
talk about ruptures,
Yeah.
attachment failures,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I've been using
Environmental
rupture a lot
stresses,
lately too. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like a rupture is enough. Ruptures are
Mm-hmm.
enough to create these patterns.
Yep.
So I'm actually very pedantic about language because language has so much meaning. We speak
Mm-hmm.
things into existence. And
Mm-hmm.
so, whether it's trauma or not trauma, the question is like, did you experience it as a rupture, a withdrawal, a stressor? Was there a disconnection from the attachment relationship? Doesn't matter if you want to call that trauma or not. If
Mm-hmm.
it was a stressful, activating experience to your brain, it impacts the learnings in your brain.
Right. Okay, so I want to sort of bridge this, I guess, into spirituality, right?
Mhm.
Because like I mentioned a little bit earlier to you, I focus on helping others develop their intuition, their discernment, as well as like spiritual abilities and skills, mediumship, psychic abilities, energy healing and stuff, for the self as well. So, especially like manifestation talk,
Yeah.
is a big thing too. So a lot of what I think the missing pieces from a lot of that has to do with our nervous system. You've touched on it a little bit lightly here. So what I don't I'm trying to be mindful of my own language, but like what might an unhealthy or a dysregulated nervous system, what would that look like?
Yeah, it can go various ways. And so we can think of dysregulated nervous systems that are all gas pedal, kind
Mhm.
of like a car.
Mhm.
And so they might have a lot of anxiety, a lot of up energy that they're trying to manage all of the time, a lot of tension and fastness in the body.
Mhm.
And there's a freneticness to it, right?
Right.
So you can be an intellectualizer and have up energy. You're constantly planning, managing, figuring things out.
Mhm.
And then you might have someone who's in the emergency brake, right?
Right.
And so they're very collapsed, disconnected, and they might have a hard time even functioning in life or connecting, right?
Mhm.
Like they themselves are very down, very depressed, fatigued. And then you have this interesting third option that's like slamming on the gas with the emergency brake on, functional creatives.
Mhm.
This is the one where you will find most intellectualizers, people pleasers, and perfectionists. I'm going to do a quick sidebar here, but if you
Yeah.
think about the window of tolerance, which is essentially the space we have to move up and down in life and experience stressors and good things, it's really about our capacity
Mhm.
and respond to it. Sometimes we have more capacity, sometimes we have less, but the idea being most of the time we feel okay. When you grow up in these stressful environments with ruptures and attachment, dysregulation, what happens is you're popped out of the window of tolerance. You're a child. You don't have much of the window of tolerance as it is. You rely on your caregivers, people around you, to lend their
Yeah.
capacity. When you're not getting that and
Mhm.
you exist outside of there for long enough, that's where you do the gas and emergency brake because your brain and nervous system says, we're never getting back into the window of tolerance, but we have to live. So we're going to build our own little faux window of tolerance, you know? It's going to
Mm-hmm.
look just like the window of tolerance, but we'll be completely offline the entire time, but we'll act as if.
Mm.
So we stomp the gas, we keep going.
Yeah.
Right? And that is one of the hardest ones, I think, for people to notice because they will look functional and they will feel functional, but
100%.
they will feel very anesthetized, right? And they don't realize it often until they start having symptoms, like they might have chronic illnesses, migraines, grinding their teeth, GI issues, hormonal issues, because there's so much bracing in the body. And in all three of these states, it's important to remember, what do these states really mean?
Mm-hmm.
They mean that some part of us is perceiving there to be a threat.
Yeah.
When we're perceiving there to be a threat, would that be a really good and easy time to connect to ourselves and our intuition and our environment around us? It would not. It's like locking a person in a room full of tigers, and saying, let me know what your intuition tells you. Like, what's your gut
Right.
instinct, right? It's
Yes.
not
Yes.
possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So how can we start to slow down and recognize to break some of these patterns?
It's such a good question. And the number one thing I teach online that I think it kind of annoys people because it's not like a super glamorous thing to do, but the place to start
Yeah.
that builds everything else is about observing,
Mm-hmm.
noticing, and being curious. And it's not analytical observing. So it
Right.
takes some practice to do this. The best analogy that I can think of to describe this is a wildlife documentarian. If you
Okay.
know David Attenborough or if you ever watch Planet Earth,
Mm-hmm.
it's even people who don't care that much about animals, they'll watch these documentaries because they're calming, they're relaxing, and there's
Yeah.
no judgment in them, right? They're learning about these animals, all they can learn. Then they're going out and they're observing them and they're narrating it to us with no judgment. The
Right.
birds are going to do their weird little mating dance, and the mother lion will kill to feed her cubs, and these things happen.
Mm-hmm.
That is the practice we want to cultivate within ourselves. We want to be our own wildlife documentarian. So rather than being in the analysis, it's almost as if we could come up into our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
The scientific term for this is metacognition, and observe our observing.
Okay.
Right? And so when we do this, it's a different way of gathering data. Right? So someone might come into me and say, "Oh, well, I gather data. I had a really stressful week at work. And then I came home, and I really needed to do my meditation and my workout so that I could sleep well. But instead, I sat and scrolled on the couch like I always do because I'm such a loser and I'll never be any different." And I'm like, okay, great. What data are you gathering from that? And I'm like, well, I never can follow through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what else? Well, when I'm stressed, it's like I'm more likely to go and scroll on the couch. And it's like, what else did you notice, right? When we really get up into the observation and we break things down, there's a stress, then there's what happens in response to the stress, and then there's how you respond to yourself in what
Mm-hmm.
happens to the stress. I scrolled on the couch because I'm an idiot and I
Mm-hmm.
never follow through. So it's like, oh, so you criticize yourself. And I have people say this to me all the time. No, I'm not criticizing myself. It's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, it's a fact, right? So, like, this real granular observation, because at every moment in that 2-second story I just told, there's a pattern happening, right?
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
pattern within the body. I didn't even bring that in, but I bet you felt super tense after work. I
Mm-hmm.
bet maybe you felt a little numb and anesthetized, and so you reached for another numbing device. And
Yeah.
then when we're numb, we're much more likely to criticize ourselves. But this really granular observation is what can reveal the areas for deeper work. Once we've practiced this observation, the rest of the skills come easily. And I know it sounds kind of silly, but it's like when you really practice being so fascinated and curious about yourself, you will see these micro moments that you're missing now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you say, I never follow through. Back it way up. What was the thing you were never following through on? Was it trying to take care of yourself? What did you learn about taking care of yourself? What would it mean to have needs? How did other people treat you when you had needs? What was your responsibility for taking care of other people's needs? What emotions do you feel when you think about these things?
Mm-hmm.
How does your body respond when you think about taking care of yourself? Focusing on the not following through is the wrong behavior to focus on. That's an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
We could back it all the way up. It's like we had a DVD and we would go frame by frame by frame. to see each of these things, because from this place we can start to create themes and see like, oh, okay, whenever I'm stressed, I go numb and then I do a dissociating activity and then I criticize myself. So maybe I
Mm.
should back up and see, is there something happening at work where I'm telling myself I have to get it right or I'll lose everything? Does that make sense? We kind of back our way
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
these bigger lenses, is kind of how I think about it. What are the
Mm-hmm.
lenses through which you're seeing the world versus what's actually happening?
Mm.
Once you've done this and you can map some of these things out, that's when you can start to work with your brain and your body through trying on little experiments, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you start to feel, wow, I'm really stressed, and you've identified, it's because a part of me is feeling like if I don't hit this presentation perfectly, I'll lose my job and then I'll lose everything. When you notice that and you notice the tenseness behind all of that, what would it be like in that moment if you could turn to yourself and say, hey, I see that you're feeling really stressed right now. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little interrupt in a different way of relating to yourself. It's not as simple as I'm making it seem, but it is at the same time.
Yeah.
Like we know the main mechanisms of change are observation and then a different experience. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Totally. So it's basically just inviting a little bit more softness.
Softness. And so, because I told you I'm weird about language, you didn't say anything wrong. But what I would say
Right.
is neutrality,
Gotcha.
because for some people, the softness comes
Yeah.
definitely,
Okay. Okay.
but the documentarian has a neutrality to them. Why I say
Right.
that is because if we try to start with softness
Mm-hmm.
and we're like an intellectualizer, we will reject it.
Right.
There's no place for softness here. It's not safe.
So, okay, so let's talk about safety then too, because I think a lot
Yeah.
of our conditioning around safety, a lot of us, our idea of safety is like so fragmented. It feels like we might have been promised safe spaces by parents or caretakers and weren't given that, right? Like it's like, or was conditioned, right? So how can we I guess unlearn or move through some of those experiences so that we actually are, because I always kind of like tense up at the when someone's like, this is a safe space. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
for you, maybe not for everybody here. And I try to be mindful of that language as well, in meditation spaces and stuff like that. So how can we, I don't know, decolonize even that kind of terminology?
Such a great question. And you're so right, right? Because the perception of that is going to be based on our own unique experience.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard for people to understand that when we say safety, we don't mean someone is standing here and they're going to hurt me.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A felt sense of safety is made up of thoughts, emotions, and body sensations,
Mm-hmm.
as well as our perception of the environment around us. And so it's a sense of okayness, right? A
Mm-hmm.
sense of no danger, a sense of no perception of threat. No perception of threat. That's very important. Because I
Mm-hmm.
will say to people, your parents never told you if you weren't successful that they weren't going to be okay or they weren't going to love you or anything like that.
Right.
But when you feel the lift and then the tension, what you feel is, I'm a child. I need my caregivers to be okay so that I can
Mm-hmm.
be okay. I literally cannot take care of myself. So
Mm-hmm.
what I perceive the tension of them is a threat to my safety.
Right.
Them not being okay, I perceive as a threat to my safety. So now being good and perfect is tied with safety in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's unconscious and it's emotional.
Mm-hmm.
People will say, that's not rational. And I say, I am so sorry to be the one to tell you. Emotions are not required to
Right.
be rational. By the way,
Right.
neither are thoughts. Like,
Right.
who
Yes.
told you that thoughts were rational, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
brain is just doing this all of the
Yeah.
time. And so
Yeah.
the experience of safety, and particularly in this very colonized way, right, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, you should feel safe here, or you should feel safe with me, or you should have the same experience that I'm having of safety,
Mm-hmm.
is like a complete misunderstanding of the way that humans experience each other and
Yeah.
the rupture in our environments that many of us experienced even in utero,
Mm-hmm.
right? To
Mm-hmm.
not have a sense of safety, to not have a community. Sometimes people laugh at me when I bring this up, but like we don't even give people health insurance in the US, and you expect people to have some sense of safety. Like we're
Well, with
one paycheck away, right?
even with everything going on right now, I see, like, I'm in Canada, right? But we still feel the effects, and we still have
Of
our
course.
own political bullshit up here as well. But looking at it now too, it's like our I think everyone's kind of waking up to our threat of safety in terms of the systems that we thought would protect us and thought
Exactly.
would, keep us safe, and are not doing that. So I feel like, I don't know if you're noticing this, but do you feel like people are, like, that whole idea, it's in itself is being kind of, shaking up our perception of safety and understanding of that as well.
I agree. And many people who have not in their lives had to confront safety in
Right.
this way because of their identities are now having to confront it. And it's terrifying and jarring to them,
Yeah.
rightfully so.
Yep.
But having never experienced it before,
Mhm.
for people who have always had identities that have been intentionally marginalized, in some ways, their systems have had to be braced and protected.
Yeah.
And so this is another rupture in a long line of ruptures. And so their system very much will experience the effects of it. But for people who've never had to fully come face to face with systems that they thought were protecting them, now turning on them, I mean,
Mhm.
it's terrifying to their system, which is why you see so many people saying the world is ending. Like the world is
Yeah.
not ending,
Not
but your
ending.
perception of the system shattering in front of you feels like the world is ending. That's
Mhm.
the same for us as children, by the way, when
Yeah.
we have these experiences where it's like my perception of my parents as these safe people is getting shattered by this way that, I'm a kid every time I have emotions, which kids do all the time.
Mhm.
My parents freeze up because they don't know how to be with emotions. Again, there's that perception of the shattering of the safety of the attachment relationship, big and
Mhm.
small, of course,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
we have these experiences all throughout our lives, and how much we're willing to confront them is how much we're able to show up in the world and move toward change for ourselves and communities around us.
Right. So, are there, I don't want to say easy, but are there maybe some more basic or simplified ways that we can call on a little bit more safety? Because I know too, how
Yes,
we are feeling in our safe environments also is what sort of fuels us to set and maintain healthy boundaries as well,
so
right? The two
true.
kind of go hand in hand.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there are much smaller ways to start, right? And so, one of the simplest, but my favorite activities that I'll often teach people is so cleverly, I call it the 333. But essentially, you're
I
going
love
to
that.
look around the space and name three things you see. And
Hmm.
it's very important when you do it that you're turning your head and looking with your eyes while you turn your head. So,
Okay.
I could look in front of me and say, yellow water bottle, white mug, pink keyboard.
Right.
Or I could turn my head and I could say, blue bowl, gray couch, pink lamp. Why is that important? It invokes something in humans called the orienting response.
Okay.
And that's what mammals do to essentially say, are things safe right now?
Mm,
So if you've ever watched like gazelles grazing on the Serengeti, they're eating, but they're looking.
right.
They're
Right.
eating, they're digesting, but some part of them is saying, yep, things are safe right now.
Hmm.
When everything around us is in such chaos, our system doesn't find safety even when it's there.
Hmm.
So when we're in our home, for example, and this is again making an assumption your home is a safe place, which it might not be. When you're
Right.
in your room, when you're in the bathroom, when you're in your car, you're looking around and you're finding these three things. And then you're coming in and you're going to name either three things in your body, on your body, or that you can touch. People have different levels of capacity for that.
Hmm.
But for example, I could say in my body, I feel a little tension in my shoulders. I could say on my body, I feel my glasses on my ears. Or I could say, touching, I feel the smoothness of my leggings. So
Mm,
it's about a more kinesthetic
yeah.
touching
Yeah.
experience.
Okay.
And then three different things you see. So what this process does is, again, it sends a signal of safety to the brain. Now, sometimes when I talk about this online, I get a lot of pushback of people saying, this is stupid. This isn't going to do any good in the face of the things we're experiencing.
Because people
And
are
I get
looking for
that.
like these huge
Yeah, right.
answers, or yeah, yeah, yeah,
Me too.
yeah.
Me too. I'm looking
Totally.
for
Yeah.
huge answers, right?
Yeah.
But no matter the situation, we have some form of agency. And if all the
Hmm.
agency I have in the moment is to see three things around me and send a teeny signal of safety to my brain, Does that not make me more able to connect to myself, show up for the people around me, be out in the community? And even if you don't go out in the community, right? So, like showing
Mm-hmm.
up online, for example, that's
Mm-hmm.
part of being in the community.
Yeah.
So, yes, it has a much bigger impact than you would think. We are all in each other's systems.
Mm-hmm.
As you send little signals of safety to your system, you will send little signals of safety out. So that's one of my favorite things to practice. And maybe you've heard of the glimmers. It's in the polyvagal community. It's was built to say it's the opposite of triggers.
Okay.
So it's a little something that you can practice about something that catches your eye. There's like a very famous quote from Kurt Vonnegut, and he's talking about his uncle Alex and how, they'd be sitting on the porch drinking a cup of tea, chatting, and he would just interrupt and say, "If this isn't nice, I don't know what is." And that's kind of the concept of glimmers, where it's again these tiny micro moments where I might say, I have my yellow water bottle sitting here. It's one of my favorite shades. It's like a marigold yellow.
Mm.
And just noticing that and saying, "Oh, I love that shade of yellow." That
Yeah.
also sends a little signal of safety to the brain. Again, this is not a little like, and now everything's okay because I have
Right.
my water bottle.
Yeah.
But we really underestimate the importance of sending signals of safety to our brain and to our nervous system. That's part of
Mm-hmm.
it too,
Mm-hmm.
especially when things are in such chaos.
Yeah.
And so, starting in these really small ways, double it by observing how you feel after it, right? Does any part of
Mm-hmm.
you, like maybe you feel like you let down a tiny bit, or you have a little smile because you saw your cat walk by, or maybe you text a friend and say, "This is what my glimmer was today." That's a way you can kind of double the power of it.
Right. See, in my mind too, I'm going like I'm thinking like these are also how I would frame when we might access intuitive hits as well. When we're
Mhm.
slowing down in these mindful moments, you're just taking like I love how you just worded that, like to like really get into like the color of something, what this makes me feel like, because it's in those moments too when we slow down that we do get either a connection to spirit, connection to intuition, or something in our inner world is has more space to come through and kind of speak to us, you know?
100%. I agree. And I practice, I do a visualization practice every night before I go to bed, and I get one of two outcomes. The first outcome is it feels really good. I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited about it. I go to sleep dreaming about it. The second outcome is I get a negative reaction. And I actually like when that
Mm.
happens too,
Mm-hmm.
because it lets me know there's a detour or a block.
Okay.
So it's very revealing. So if I go to
Can I ask?
sleep,
Can I ask? Sorry, what to you is a negative reaction?
okay, so a negative reaction might be that I start to feel bracing,
Okay.
or I start to jump to thinking, I don't have time to do this right now.
Right.
I
Right.
need to
Right.
get to sleep so I can be ready. So, any reaction that isn't me feeling like, oh, this is nice. I'm excited
Mm-hmm.
about this thing I'm visualizing.
Right. Right.
When we can use these things like um, experiments,
Yep.
we can look at the data they reveal, because when I am taking care of myself and connected to myself, I make things happen. I
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
visualize these things. I intuitively know they're coming and they unfold in front of me. But
Mm-hmm.
what blocks me from that, blocks, quote unquote, it's a detour,
Yeah.
is if an old learning in my brain comes up, right? So if I have this thing that I've been visualizing for months, and I'll have certain nights where I'm trying to do it and I'll just go like, that's never going to happen. Why would no one ever is going to care about that for you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
just, you're not a person who can ever have that. And I'm like, whoa, interesting, right? So
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying, no, I can't have this, which is overriding the experience,
Mm-hmm.
some part of me is needing or wanting something from me right now. Some part of me doesn't feel safe enough to
Mm-hmm.
connect to this thing. And so it's like the coolest opportunity to be like, oh, what did I learn about what I'm allowed to have in life?
Mm-hmm.
What's feeling unsafe for me right now about taking this time for myself or opening myself up to what's going to come? So I actually love working with my clients on like manifestation and things like that,
Okay.
because instead of trying to manage the outcome of it,
Yes.
you use it as an experiment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so cool because it reveals so much.
I love that because people really are focused on the outcome of things. And
I know.
it is difficult to try to be like, I mean, my language is always obviously working with spirit. So
Yeah.
letting spirit, letting your guides, letting energy kind of sort itself out, not just trusting that whatever will sort of happen for you will be in your greatest alignment for the greater good of yourself. And I
Yeah.
know that that's very difficult for a lot of people. I want to kind of like dial back a little bit to boundaries because we were,
Yeah.
talking a little bit about that. And I think why people might have some difficulty in setting them, maintaining them, is because we had difficulty doing that in our youth, perhaps, or like
Mhm.
just what are your thoughts, I guess, on why boundaries might be so threatening, especially to people pleasers,
Yeah.
right? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So issues or challenges with boundaries are all founded again in these implicit, unconscious
Right. You were
experience.
talking about I saw your post on the
Yeah.
implicit and explicit. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So many times we try to address boundaries in an explicit way. What I
Mm-hmm.
mean by explicit is like an outcome, a thing
Mm-hmm.
to do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Here is how I would set a boundary to a person who's doing this thing. Here is the consequence of that boundary. Great. If you're a people pleaser and intellectualizer, you don't need help with those things. Okay.
Right.
You probably already imagined setting the boundary like 300 to 400 times.
Yes.
You've
Yeah.
read every book about it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not an explicit problem. It's an implicit, unconscious blocker.
Okay.
Why? Because in some way, the brain is perceiving. So in coherence therapy, they talk about two sufferings. And what they mean by that is we're usually caught in a bind. And both sides of the bind can involve some suffering, as many things do in life.
Mm-hmm.
But our brain uses the things that have happened to us over time to predict what the lesser of the two sufferings will be.
Okay.
Okay? So if I learned every time I have a need with my parent, it just creates so much stress and activation for them, right? Or every time I have a need with my parent, they belittle me. Or
Mm-hmm.
every time I have a need with my parent, they might meet the need, but they're going to hold it over my head for like
Mm-hmm.
weeks or months and make me pay them back and do all of these things. Three different experiences that all can create a learning that says having needs and thus having boundaries is not okay and could lead to withdrawal of love, disconnection, attachment ruptures, and even danger. Right?
Mm.
Because remember, these things can feel like a life threat,
Totally. Yep.
even in adult lives, right? Many of
Mm-hmm.
us have been in situations where us having a boundary, having a need was not accepted for many reasons, societally, at work, with
Mm-hmm.
a partner.
Yep. Yep.
This is data. Your brain is a data model.
Mm-hmm.
It's taking data in from the spirit realm, from the environment, from your history, and then it's predicting what's going to happen. So when you have implicit learnings that are predicting having a boundary will lead to this horrible bad suffering, then wouldn't it be a lesser suffering to just never have any needs? Yes, it
Right.
would be a
Yep.
much lesser, we perceive,
Right.
suffering. The truth is, it's not really a lesser suffering. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually an incredibly difficult and disconnecting way to live. We're miserable, we're often resentful, we often feel more disconnected from people and frozen.
Mm-hmm.
But a part of our brain perceives that that threat to the relationship, the threat to the connection, or whatever thing we think is going to happen will be worse. So we
Right.
have to figure out what it is the brain thinks is going to happen. This is tricky because intellectualizers, people pleasers, etc., they'll give me a rational answer.
Total. I
They'll say,
literally. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Nothing's going to happen.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, and they'll say, well, if I set this boundary with my partner and nothing's going to happen, but if they get mad at me, then they weren't the person for me anyway. I'm like, that's right. So why aren't you doing it?
Right.
Right. And the reason for that is because you know that, but you don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
There's some deeper experience of like, it can be all kinds of things. I've worked with people we've uncovered that their parent weaponized boundaries against them, and controlled them through
Mm.
boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
using the specific terminology of boundaries to control all of their behaviors that super, enmeshed, wrapped up, no space for them to be their own person. So
Mm-hmm.
in their life, setting a boundary made them this horrible, bad, controlling monster.
Yeah.
Did they consciously know that? No. They consciously had this feeling of like, I'm just a people pleaser. It's just hard for me to set boundaries, but I know nothing bad will happen. But explicitly, they could never follow through.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get to what the brain is predicting is going to happen. I'll become this big, horrible, mean, controlling monster. And you work with the emotions, the body sensations, the experience around that. And that's what allows you to open up a new pathway to do little things at a time. This sounds kind of silly, but if you're wanting to try to have more boundaries in your life, try imagining it.
Mm-hmm.
because your brain will react as if it's happening. It will reveal things in front of you
Yeah.
just by imagining the thing happening.
Right.
It's much safer and more protected. People think they have to go strong arm their way into setting boundaries. That's just overriding,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you can
Mm-hmm.
practice, like, imagine, walk yourself through that situation where you set that boundary with your partner. What are the emotions? What are you feeling like? Where's the moment where you feel that tension and anxiety come in? And back up. What just happened? What is your brain predicting? It takes some, I call it so whatting, where you
Okay.
say, okay, they get upset. So what? What
Mm.
happens next? Well, I don't know. Nothing will happen. Yeah, but think about it. Like, what does your brain think will happen? It's like, well, then they might not want to be with me anymore. So what? What would happen after that? And it's like, well, this is my first and only partner I've ever had. Like, I'm not a lovable person. So if I lose this thing, I might never have anyone else. And it's like, okay, so what is it then that you'll never have anyone else? And it's like, yeah, I'll never have anyone else. I'll just be, all my other friends have partners, everyone I know has partners. I'll just be lonely and by myself. Right.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, so there's this like deep sense of you are fundamentally not okay. Would you set a
Yeah.
boundary then?
Right.
You wouldn't.
Right.
If the other option is you'll be alone for the rest of your life and unloved, so that's the thing we're actually working with, not the boundary.
Hmm. Interesting. Woof, you're giving us a lot to chew on, I feel like. I
Yeah,
like this.
it sounds kind of complex, I know, but it's a simpler process than you might realize
Hmm.
when you kind of get the steps. And and I'm not plugging my own work, but I have a free guide on this that
Okay.
that I'm happy to give you the link for.
Please plug away. Like plug because
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh. You mentioned that you're manifesting a book to come out, which I
Yes.
know is gonna happen. I'm helping you to plant that seed because
Thank you.
for me, I'm like, this is heaps of information that I know is needed, and I know
Yeah.
we are maybe in a more becoming maybe more self-aware, as individuals and as communities and stuff now. So, yeah, there's a lot for people, I think, to think about, I always say we're constantly unlearning and relearning, right?
Yes.
So there's so much information here, I feel like, to help people in that unlearning process. Would you say if you could share
Mhm.
like some maybe small, like a small shift or a small, like a little nugget to help any overthinkers, people pleasers, yeah,
Absolutely.
something to help that shift
So I
there.
think you probably already know the places you're stuck, right? You're
Hmm.
probably very familiar with those places.
Hmm.
And so practice going to those. Look at events from the past. You don't have to try to do something in the present. Look at these events where you felt particularly stuck and see if you can try on observing it with the wildlife documentarian lens,
Mm. Yeah.
right? To go back and look at it and say, here's what I told myself happened in this situation. What actually happened? What emotions was I feeling? What was I saying to myself? Was there something happening that I didn't realize was happening? And that can be very revealing, right? Because we have these events in our mind that we use as our sort of canon.
Hmm.
Me and this is who I am. And these are these hard events that have happened to me. And these are why I'll never, whatever the thing is.
Right.
And when we go back into those moments, there are three things plus one more that I want you to look for. Anything that could be anger, that
Hmm.
includes frustration, irritation. Anything that could be fear, and that includes terror and anxiety. And anything that could be sadness, and that includes grief, disappointment, loss. Anytime there's one of those three emotions, there's probably something lurking in your data model. There's
Mm.
something your brain is predicting is going to happen. The other thing to look out for is shame.
Okay.
Shame is present in all of these patterns, and we
Yeah.
often think that that's the thing we're working with. But I would offer you to start thinking about shame as a flag.
Mm.
Shame is a cover up. Okay. Shame is a fixer. You know what I mean? Shame comes
Hmm.
in and says, everything feels like too much. We're going to shut it all down. And it works
Right.
very well because it makes us feel bad, wrong. It puts us into that collapse.
Hmm.
So you're probably a person who criticizes and shames yourself a lot if you're in one of those three camps. That's another thing to look out for. What's underneath the shame?
Right. Okay.
Pick up the rock and look underneath. It will be one of those three: fear, sad, sadness, and anger. And
Hmm.
when you can isolate some of those emotions, you'll get so much more clear on where the work needs to be done.
Right. Okay. Woo! This was a good conversation. Thank you so much. This was
Yes,
great.
of course.
So people can Dr. Trisha, wait, do I have your thing? Where did I put your the Trisha Wolfe
Yes.
on
Trisha Wolfe is
Instagram
Yep.
and TikTok. I found you on TikTok.
Yeah.
And then you said you've also got a Substack.
I do. Yep. And that is Trisha Wolfe, WOLFE.substack.com. And I do something really fun on there, which is I read self-help and therapy books and I translate them into this model and say like, okay, everybody wants to read adult children of emotionally immature parents. What do you actually do with this information? How do you apply it into your everyday life?
I love that.
And we
Okay.
have a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah.
And on my platforms, if you go, I have my free guide.
That's what I was just going to mention. Yeah.
It's called the 5 Steps to Change.
Okay.
And it's a model. This is the model I'm writing my book on. I've been developing this model for a long time. I also teach a class on this once a quarter that I try to keep like relatively low cost to try to help you understand, because I know it sounds kind of esoteric, like, what do you mean? What do I do with this? But if you go read that guide, I think it will lay the steps out more clearly for you to see that it's really like lockstep to follow this observational pattern. It is iterative, like you'll visit the steps several times.
Okay.
But these are the mechanisms to change. Any self-help, any therapy, any model that shifts us towards more openness, more connection, it's based on these neuroscience things: memory reconsolidation and metacognition.
Okay. Beautiful. Oh, I'm excited to like dive in a little bit deeper into the things that you offer. Our brain is so fascinating. Like I so geek out over the brain. I got deep into neuroscience a couple years ago, just because, like I said, as someone who is a psychic medium, as someone who I'm like, what's the science behind it? Like, I want to know, so yeah, I love, chatting and talking with people who have that similar kind of, I can recognize that, like, let's geek out over our brain. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's so cool.
So I love that. So thank you so much. Like, this was fantastic. And I'll leave all of the links for your offerings in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for spending some time with me.
Of course. Thank you for having me on. It was a blast.
Thank you so much for curling up in the den with me today. Your energy, your presence, and your curiosity truly mean the world. If something in this episode stirred something in you, made you think, made you laugh, made you feel a little more connected, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Share this podcast with a fellow wild heart, a cosmic kin, or someone who's just walking their own path of remembering. That's how we keep growing this pride, one beautiful freaking sacred soul at a time. This space is a labor of love, and your support helps it reach the people who need it most. My darling, this lioness is always rooting for your roar. Until next time, be curious, be inspired, and be blessed. See you soon on Connected in the Den.